thank you very much for all of that. Thanks for having me. And I am standing between you and drinks, I think, myself and Martha. Yes. So I'll make it quick. I've been asked to talk about how to make change happen, which is what today has all been geared about, but to help galvanise you maybe with a little bit more about my story, but the things that I've learnt in running the organisation that is Stemmettes. So a tiny bit about me. I'm Imafidon. They mentioned that I'm a technologist. I have been so since I was about 4 years old, which is that picture there on the left. Always loved technology, understanding how things work, taking them apart and putting them back together, which my dad, I'm so thankful for him not killing me when I took apart the VCR player, maybe a couple of days after that photo was taken, just to understand how it worked and put it back together. For me, science, technology was a big part of the formative years of my life. And so I loved maths, loved technology to the point that I was one of these child prodigies. I did maths and ICT GCSEs aged just 10, went on did an A-level at 11 and left Oxford University having studied maths and computer science up to master's level aged 20. So it was something that I really enjoyed and that really drove me because I liked being creative and making things and creating things, but also helping people with the technology that I was creating. And so when we talk about responsible tech, when we talk about technology, and when we talk about normal, for me, it's quite a funny word or a funny way to kind of posit. I always think us mathematicians can't even agree on what normal means. You know, we've got so many different versions of averages and the rest of it. And you know, it was funny, the comment we kind of heard there towards the end of the panel, you know, how do you know that you're not the average? You know, everybody's got something different about them, even if you are white, middle, you know, pale, male, stale, as we used to say. You know, there's still other things that are different about you. I hope no one's offended actually by my use of pale, male, stale. And so for me, it's quite funny that you know, so many things that were science fiction have become this science normal, and we're kind of trying to play with making responsible technology the norm. But personally, in my Stemmettes journey, I've been playing with a lot of different norms. So this is one norm. This is a real photo that I took a couple of years ago in a secondary school in East London. This is a girls' secondary school, and this is a display up in their science department. I did take it covertly, which is why the picture is a little bit blurry. But can anyone tell me something interesting about this image? Right, I'm not going to call them pale, male, stale. I'm going to call them dead, white, and male. And what's interesting about this is that there's only dead white guys that we have in this image. When we talk about the norm of the people that have created this science, that have created this technology, this is the image we have. This is what is presented as normal. Whereas actually the norm is a little bit more diverse and actually had a few more different types of people that are involved. They're also dead. They're not all white and they're not all male. But, you know, we have this idea that, you know, you have to have been one of these people, you have to eventually be a dead white male to be able to be involved in technology. So this was the problem that I ended up trying to solve. Funnily enough, this still persists. So I'm looking out on this audience. You're all technologists. You're all interested in this in some way, which is why you're here in the room. How many of you would say that you recognise 4 of the women on this slide? 3. A couple of you say 3, and it's that corner, yeah. People like, I'm disappointed actually, Martha, you can only name 3. Who would say they can name 2? A couple of you, and 1. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll zip through who they are, and also so as to not embarrass anybody that's here. I must say as well, firstly, Marie Curie is not on the slide. So if any of you did put your hand up, assuming that she's not there, she could be. Of course, she fits into this group, but there are so many different people, which is, you know, again, playing with that norm. So we have Marie-Sophie Germain on the left, who was a mathematician, 1700s, very instrumental in string theory, if anyone's interested in that. And she was a fascinating person who was effectively written out of the norm. So she applied to university under a male alias, because at that time you couldn't be a woman. God forbid you're a woman studying mathematics at high level. She she duly graduated, did really well, and then, I was a woman all along, kind of came at the end with her qualification. Maybe as punishment for that, maybe as karma, I don't know, for being a woman in maths, when they then put up the Eiffel Tower in Paris, which if any of you have been to see it, you'll see they've got kind of names around the bottom rung of scientists of that day. They thought it wouldn't be proper to have a woman's name there, and so actively wrote her out of that part of the norm. The second lady, if any of you have ever flown before, anyone here ever flown? You've put your lives in her hands. She's Katharina Paust, inventor of the modern parachute, who again was very early on actually within the German military and navy and all those kinds of organisations. The third lady you should definitely recognise. She's not dead, I should say. She's the odd one out on this slide. Her name is Katherine Johnson. If any of you have seen Hidden Figures, that's what she actually looks like. She doesn't look like Taraji P. Henson, although she portrayed her very well in that film. She was, again, another mathematician, but originally she was a computer, which I always think is funny. We talk about the robots taking our jobs. She was a computer before we had the computers, back in the 60s, doing calculations, and was very instrumental with some of the mathematics to allow NASA mission, Friendship 7 mission, come back in to orbit. And then fourthly, the last lady we have, my favourite tidbit on her is that if any of you have heard of the character Betty Boop before, this is who Betty Boop was modelled on. So most of you have heard of Betty Boop. This lady on the right-hand side is Hedy Lamarr, which I imagine is probably the one that most of you knew, who was a Hollywood actress, as the image might suggest, but casually in her spare time, she was also an inventor/physicist, as you do, why wouldn't you? And she co-invented something called frequency hopping spread spectrum technology. Anyone here heard of it? A couple of you, it's a physicist in the room. Some of you may have heard of something called Wi-Fi before. There we go. So you have to thank Hedy every time you're able to connect to the Wi-Fi and do whatever you want to do. And so for me, playing with this norm was something that became more and more important. The more I developed in my technology career, the more I happened upon or saw these kind of issues that we had with women in particular, women's participation within technology and within STEM. And the more I read around it, the more I looked into it, the more I thought back to my own upbringing, I saw that actually the change that was needed, or one of the bigger changes that was needed, of many that is still needed in what is a very multifaceted problem, was that of perception. This image that we have here is, for me, it kind of illustrates it very well. Who sees a princess? Any of you here see an engineer? Most of you don't know what you're looking at. But we have this kind of warped thing outside the technology industry, at least, that we kind of don't know what a technologist looks like. We don't know who these people are that build this technology, who these people are that are engineering. You almost end up having this perception problem that then affects the norm that we have, that affects that social norm, and then affects things like policy, affects things like the number of women that we have participating. And so what I set out to do via my organisation STEMettes was to change this perception primarily for young women. And we narrowed in on that. So we only work with people who are 21 and under, which I know I'm looking out here, all of you look like you're under 21, and so might be eligible, but also need to be identify as female, identify as women. And so what we did and what we continue to do and what we've worked through in the last 6 or so years has been actually to help flip that perception, not just by introducing the girls to role models and to industry and to see that it's not like being in the Matrix and you're in a dark room with a coffee and dogs and all the other kind of perceptions and media images that we're thrown about technologists, but actually that it's an incredibly creative field to be in, which we don't talk about often enough and we don't lean into often enough when we talk about what we do. But secondly, that it's incredibly altruistic, which for me is why, I'd argue that responsible tech is already the normal, because technology is already something that is for good. There are some people that use it for bad, and there are some unintended consequences, but inherently the technology field is about solving problems and helping people. which is kind of illustrated, I hope, on this slide. And so with Stemmettes, what we've done over the last 5 years, we've worked with about 40,000 girls and young women across the UK, Ireland and parts of Europe to introduce them to this world of STEM, to change their perception, change their awareness, increase their networks if they don't have any within STEM, improve their confidence with STEM, and then also work on their knowledge. And we've brought about a lot of change. There's lots of numbers, you can see impact, you can see various examples of different things that we've done and things that we've created. But I've been asked to talk about change because we've spent a lot of time in the room today debating, talking through things, kind of almost doing the kind of homework, but now is the time, or it's always good to, change doesn't come until you act on it. And so I do always like to kind of challenge people a little bit. It's nice and it's lovely to like change and like the normal to change, but you kind of need to be the people doing it. Change isn't just going to happen to you, and if it does, it means that someone else is changing things, and it's always better if we're in the driving seat. So there are 5 things that I wanted to leave you with that I've learned on my journey over the last 6 years of trying to change things for these girls and young women, and that you might be able to apply as you go forward and as you start to act on some of the thoughts that you've had today, some of the things that you've learned today, and hopefully some of the collaborations that have come out of today. So the first thing is to make sure that you know the problem you're solving and then define your scope, which for us in Stemmettes, and even for Doteveryone and everyone else that's in this space, has been a fun journey. When we talk about women in STEM, when we talk about women in tech, when we talk about women in AI, these are all, it's not just semantics. You're almost kind of coming in and narrowing your scope and defining not just the problem you're solving, but where you fit within that. And with Stemmettes, we've been really clear that we work with girls and young women at their initial point, or while they're kind of sat on the fence, or they're evaluating, who they are, what they like, what they enjoy. We're there for them at that point. And we work just with those girls. So we don't work with women, right? We don't focus on run events that are for boys only. We don't do any of that. We know that that's a part of the solution. We know it's a multifaceted problem and we need a multifaceted solution, but we've been really clear that this is the one thing that we're going to change. I like to liken it to the suffragettes. There are a lot of things that were campaigned for around that time in terms of voting rights, but they set their own little targets, they set their scope, and they didn't say, we're going to change everything for women. They said, this is one part of the vote that we're going to aim for to change. This is one step. And they were very clear and very narrow their scope, and you can evolve that and you can change that over time, but you do need to be really clear and really set in the fact that this is what we're impacting change on, and we're not going to kind of slide around with that. The second thing, and again, there's another lady in the back of this slide that you should all recognise from the glasses alone. Grace Hopper. The number of graphics you see actually with just the glasses, not even the rest of the face in it. So Grace Hopper, there's a great quote attributed to her saying, it is better to seek forgiveness than it is to seek permission, which for me, kind of flipping it, I know, especially if you've kind of got bad actors, might sound contrary to maybe some of what we've heard already today, but it's important to be action-led sooner rather than later, which I think often you can kind of dither on, I don't know if I should do this, I don't know if I should do that, we're not sure if we should do this, we're not sure if we're allowed to do this. In the early days of Stemmettes, it was, look, I've seen this, we've done a little bit of research, we've read papers, we've lived the experience and have been women in industry, here's what we're going to try out and here's what we're going to see whether or not it works. And actually being action-led meant that we were able to start impacting that change, but other people were able to join in with that action. Third is to design with collaboration in mind. To multiply your impact. There's only so much you can do as one person. There's only so much you can do as one organisation. And bigger change and great change works well, not just when you collaborate with others, but when you design that as part of your process. So you're saying, this is not a change that I'm going to do on my own. The change is contingent on being able to pull together different actors, whether that's public sector, whether that's private sector, wherever that might be. For us as Stemmettes, we can't run events unless we have industry partners, because it's built into the programme. It's the way we run things, that we need real people to be there to inspire, to be there as judges, to be there as panellists, whatever it might be. So we can't just sit up and say we're going to run an event and have impact. We've designed with collaboration in mind, which has meant that it's not just us that have skin in the game for any change we're trying to make. We've got other people that then are inspired and can go off and are empowered to make change alongside us and help it happen. Number 4, I think, is that we iterate with clear feedback loops. And it's interesting because we talk so much about data as well, especially in this space, but we've got to remember at the end of the day, it's not just the data. We're talking about human beings, we're talking about hearts and minds. And so it's just as important to get qualitative data to see how people feel, how people are thinking, what their opinions are, and collect that and feedback that into what we're iterating, as much as collecting numbers and collecting the quantitative side of things. The other thing we found really, really handy, which I guess in the GDPR side of things, and maybe for the change you're trying to affect might not be relevant, but for us, we always try and hold on to the impact data in its raw format. So all of ours is anonymised anyway, so it's not necessarily personal information, but we try and leave it there so we're able to go back and later on go back and compare things that we may not have seen the first time round. And that's built into the way that we iterate and the way that we get better. And so if you've been to an event 6 years ago, if you come to an event now, we're continuously getting better for the impact that we're trying to make. And for the impact that's having on the girls and their perspectives and their awareness and their network. Finally, is to have values and communicate them clearly, which you'll see in the back of this slide is there's a lot of food there. Our values, our ethos that we kind of developed very early on actually was that everything that we do is free for the girls, everything we do is fun for them, and there is always food for them. It's the 3 Fs of the Stemmettes ethos. We find people love free food. I think more interestingly is that these are young women who wouldn't normally buy their own food, who even more so appreciate the free food, the events that we run. But we found it really important actually to work out loud as we go through the process of trying to drive this change. And we've been able to communicate everything that we do, or communicate, those values through everything we're doing as we're doing it in a way that allows other people to then be able to carry it on, which goes back to that collaborative effect. We've not been able to reach 40,000 people on our own. Me going out and talking to schools or whoever else it might have been, I would not have been able to reach that many people in that period of time, but being able to allow others to take on the message and to carry it forward has meant that we can have bigger change in a shorter period of time. And so there you have kind of happy faces and change and a big purple monster as well, because why not? And so in terms of kind of lessons learning and what now happens next and why I'm here today and why I'm kind of excited actually to be giving the closing keynote, is that in working with so many girls and young women, working with so many young people who are so creative, who are so altruistic and who are discovering their purpose in tech or discovering their true potential in tech, for me it's been a fascinating way to actually have a bit of an insight into what the future workforce looks like, which is something that people then started to ask me, what are the girls looking for? What are they driven by? What are they preparing for? What would they want when they are no longer 5 years old, but they're ready to be working in however many years' time? And so it's a discussion that I ended up having with various different people. Of course, in the process of collaborating, you kind of see other opportunities and get to see other organisations. And that question, it very quickly developed into what should the future workplace look like that these girls are going to be in? What should we be doing? What can we proactively do to make sure that this is going to be a fantastic place for them to work and even more fantastic than the workspace is already? And so I was involved with the Future of Work Commission a couple of years ago. 2 years, was it, Anna? I can't even remember now. It feels like a decade ago, a couple of years ago, and we put out a Future Commission report with Tom Watson, the kind of deputy leader of the Labour Party, and there were so many things that got thrown up in looking into the future of the workplace. What will change, what is changing, what is happening, what role is AI playing in all of that, and ethics, and lots of all the other themes that we've been talking about today. And it was an interesting discussion that led, and as most things do, became an institute for the future of work late last year, where we are now looking at change, or I'm now involved in looking at change in a different type of way, in a different nuance, still within the same vein, but looking at, what should we be allowed to do at work? What does fairness look like at work? What does fairness look like in the technology that we have at work? And in a way that actually, if we look at defining scope and trying to change things, work is such a big part of our lives. For a lot of people, it's also a big part of their identity. And so this seemed actually like a nice natural progression to be able to make change. The Institute itself, our kind of priorities, got 4 priorities. So on creating and valuing work and what does good work look like. When you're kind of looking at fighting a robot for work, which bits do you want the algorithm to do and which bits do you want to keep? Which bits should you keep? Which bits should you be allowing an algorithm to do? The second one is promoting equality, which of course is something that's very close to my heart. Third is supporting people most at risk. And then fourth is diversifying ownership and control. But what we've seen with the Institute and what we've enjoyed with the Institute is actually being able to apply some of those principles for making change and try and codify them actually for other people that want to be a part of making sure that we proactively ensure a greater future of work. And so I'm pleased to announce, with kind of confetti, if you imagine confetti cannons as we have at STEMettes events, the launch of our Equality Through Transition discussion paper, which is the first part or first step in our process of our Equality Through Transition stream of work that we're doing with the Institute for the Future of Work. That you're the first people to know, and you'll be the first people to be able to download it. It's gone live now. Yes, there we go. It's gone live now. But where we're looking and doing some more of that work, like I talked about, in terms of defining our scope, defining the problem, looking at what it is that we want to focus on, where we've actually identified, if you read the paper, these kind of 3 levels of where we need to be considering the impact of technology in the workplace, not just for individuals, but at the firm level and at the system level. And we've identified a couple of challenges that we definitely want to work on. But what's been fantastic, or what's really exciting about this, is the fact that we're already thinking about the action. So there's already things that other people can do to be able to collaborate and be a part of. And there are task forces that are open for you to get involved in. If you're looking at some of these key challenges and you feel like that's something you might want to get involved with, or you might want to be part of changing. And all the details, of course, are up on the Institute for the Future of Work's website. I also want to highlight, I do have a copy. I've only got 2, so you'll have to be quick. But a fun thing that we've got in here, a fun resource as well that we developed as part of Key Challenge 2, is a fairness impact assessment, which is hoping is kind of one of the earlier examples of best practice for these types of things that you might want to be implementing. Because I know there's been a couple of discussions already about, what does it actually mean to look at fairness, and how do we apply that in our workplaces. So I wanted to close to kind of say that as much as debate is great and discussing has been good, we do want to go into change, but that change is something that happens in small steps. So it's not that we're going to go out and everything's going to be fantastic by next week, although I'm sure Martha would wish that it was all sorted maybe within 12 months. I've heard you say before. But there is small changes, and that we actually need to make sure that we're vigilant, because sometimes, change happens, or bad things happen, because you're silent. Good people are silent. So I've got 2 examples here of where actually just a small change or something slightly different has ended up blowing up unnecessarily so. I love using these examples. I don't love the fact that they exist for me to use as real examples. The image on the left-hand side, some of you may recognise this. So this was a couple of years ago. The European Space Agency had the Rosetta mission to Mars. And it was massive because we love space for some reason as human beings. And so it was everywhere. It was all over the news. It was on breakfast television. It was everywhere. And this was the person that turned up to represent the European Space Agency on such a big day of the launch. Just in case you can't see at the back, there are kind of half-naked women on the person's shirt. And you can see the caption at the bottom that says, no, women are totally welcome in our community. Just ask the dude in this shirt. I always kind of give people this example is that, what are you doing to kind of affect just small changes to make sure that we don't have this kind of bigger catastrophic kind of weird quirks that we have in our norm. For me, that image, you've got to think, that person owns that shirt. There was someone there when that transaction was made. Who didn't say, hang on a second, maybe that's not something you want to wear. Not only does that person own it, that person then wore it that day, and no one stopped them and said, that's a fun shirt to be wearing out of the house or at the bus stop. That person then went to work, and no one at work said, hey, what a shirt to be wearing at work. Not only did that person go to work, that person then went to the TV studio with someone, I'm sure there was a minder, I'm sure there was a minder because it's the European Space Agency, who then turned up with them in the studio and said nothing. There was a producer, there were cameramen, there were all camera women, camera people, all kinds of crew. Lots of people didn't say anything. And so then this was broadcast and sent around everywhere, right? So it's just small things. If you were the person who said, don't buy that shirt, I wouldn't be here having this story to tell you. On the flip side of that, I saw Martin from UK Black Tech actually saw some of his slides on Twitter earlier. On the flip side of that, you also want to make sure that you kind of also change who's in your environment and you're vigilant to that. So this example on the right-hand side, a little bit closer to home on the AI front. Many of you actually in this room will recognise it. Apologies if this is your company. I've cut you out to save face a little bit. The first picture is skyscrapers. Agreed. That's what the AI has worked out that it is. The image recognition. Airplanes. Check. Cars. Bikes. Good enough. Gorillas. Yeah. Wait. No. And this was trained on however many ridiculous, hugely statistically significant number of data points, which of course weren't as diverse as they could be, but also the people you had testing internally. No one had any kind of picture that you might have tested against that gorilla test case. So changes, it's the small things. Don't be disheartened as you leave today. It's totally possible to make change happen. I believe responsible technology is the new normal, will be the new normal. I question the word normal, just because who wants to be normal? And I'll leave you on that. Thank you very much.